You don't have to be a hardcore triathlon fan or super fan to notice that a lot of professional triathletes are popping and throwing back energy drinks like a little kid candy on Halloween. So let's talk about why these professional triathletes are throwing back energy drinks like it's on sale, and maybe how you can incorporate that in your training plan. Hey guys, welcome back to another video. My name is Luke. I'm your average middle pack triathlete who finally was able to say this in take one. Yay. On this channel, we're covering everything triathlon related from the perspective of someone who is working a regular 9-to-5 job and who is not a professional or aspiring professional triathlete, just like I said, your average middle pack triathlete. If you have been following the channel for a while, you will notice that before we switched over to triathlon and all that's going on the channel now, I actually covered predominantly GFuel content. And if you look at my very first video on this channel about GFuel, it was also my most successful video. So naturally, the question came up when I started making triathlon related content, how does GFuel play into my triathlon everyday routine? But before we dive really into how you can use GFuel for your triathlon training, I just want to point out that I will leave you a link down in the description below to all the GFuel videos that I've made so far, and also the videos where I'm covering the GFuel formula really in depth, what each ingredient means. So I will not be covering this again in this video. So if that's interesting to you, that is down in the description below. But that was enough for me. Let's finally get going. How can we use GFuel to not even game better at night, but also perform better in our workouts the next morning? A lot of highly professional triathletes, top of the world athletes, are throwing back Red Bull like there's no other. And there's a few reasons. Number one, they're sponsored. No one else could afford the consumption of Red Bull that these athletes go through. Number two is that it's actually beneficial during a training session or even prior to a training session. And for that, there's again two reasons. Reason number one is the caffeine that Red Bull provides. And I will throw in the nutrition label of a regular 0.33 or 12 fluid ounce Red Bull can on the screen. Caffeine has been studied over and over and over and been shown to increase performance across the board for all participants. We're not talking about insane performance increases of 20 to 50%, but between 5 and maybe even up to 10% of a performance increase if caffeine is consumed a little prior and during the training session. Caffeine being the most important point. Point number two is the amount of carbohydrates in the form of simple sugars that you get with your average Red Bull energy drink can. And if you pay close attention, you will notice that these professionals are not consuming diet Red Bull, they're consuming the full sugar experience. Because again, we all know what's a triathlete's favorite macro? Carbohydrates. Now the question is, does it have to be Red Bull, or can it also be any other energy drink and maybe even GFuel? Let's take these 2 points, caffeine and carbohydrates, and apply that to GFuel and see how that compares. Looking at caffeine and GFuel, we get about 150 milligrams, give or take, per serving of GFuel. On average, it is recommended to consume between 2 to 4 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. So GFuel does provide a decent amount of caffeine, and if we compare that to, for example, a gel, your average gel has about 50 to 100 milligrams, sometimes even more than that of caffeine. So GFuel is on the higher end on the caffeine scale. Now, let's talk about point number two, which are the carbohydrates. Here is where it becomes a little tricky with GFuel, because GFuel is in essence a 0-calorie energy drink, meaning there is not really any carbohydrates in that drink, besides in some formulas there are 5 grams of carbohydrates in it. Now, if we look at how many grams of carbohydrates the average athlete is consuming during a race, or maybe even doing a training session, preparing and simulating a race, we're talking about somewhere from 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Here, 5 grams that you can get in your GFuel would not really make a difference. But that does not mean that you can't use GFuel in your nutrition and fueling plan. Where I would bring in GFuel would be to get me going for a training session. And for a training session, you often do not need to consume carbohydrates or fuel very much besides water and maybe electrolytes during it. So GFuel would be ideal to kind of get you going and consume before, maybe even into the beginning of the session. It would hydrate you very well because usually you would mix it probably between 8 to 16 ounces of water. And if you want to know how to mix GFuel the best, because it could be a little tricky, I also link to a video down in the description below. But that's enough of that. But if you need to consume carbohydrates during the training session or during a race, GFuel would not be great unless you mix a GFuel and then a carbohydrate source into that same bottle or consume it in a different way. Then yes, GFuel would work as well. But if we think about it, GFuel markets itself as a gaming energy drink that gets you ready for your gaming session, that provides focus without the crash at the end, and releases the energy steadily throughout your session, and then lets you come down of it nicely at the end. Again, not crashing. So would I recommend GFuel before a training session? Yeah, absolutely. I would probably consume GFuel over a regular pre-workout for a training session. And there's lots of reasons why we don't want a traditional pre-workout supplement for an endurance sport training session, but that can be a whole nother video in itself. I would consume GFuel about 30 minutes prior to your training session that you want it to be utilized in, so to speak. And then if you need to, consume a different source of carbohydrates throughout the training session and maybe top off of caffeine if you have a really long session with a gel or so and carbohydrates within that gel as well whenever you need it in that session. So there you have it. It is really, really simple. Does it have to be GFuel? No, you can use any other energy drink as well, but be careful. There is energy drinks like Bang, for example, that come in at a crashing 300 milligrams of caffeine. And the last thing we want in an endurance session to be so absolutely cracked out of our mind on caffeine that we can't really focus on the session and putting down the numbers. We're all over the place. This might be great for the gym when we only have to focus on a short amount of time and we can crank out that PR or crank out that 1 rep max. But on a training session where we want to focus and be engaged for hours potentially at a time, I would not recommend an energy drink higher than 150 milligrams of caffeine or even potentially going over 300 plus. And guys, that is it with today's video. Thank you so much for sticking around. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions for me, please let me know down in the comments below. And if you liked the video, it would mean the world if you would smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm and subscribe if you want to stick around. Other than that, I will catch you in the next time.